U.S. President Donald Trump's permanent halting of foreign aid is expected to have a detrimental impact on the future of research programs at some local universities. For years, U.S.-funded programs have helped researchers and academics at various institutions become key players in finding solutions to regional and global challenges. Our reporter, Latashia Naidoo, is at Stellenbosch University for us this afternoon. And Latashia, good afternoon. That's one of the institutions that have been affected. Tell us how, to what extent?
Good afternoon, Michelle. Yes, we do know that Stellenbosch University as a whole lists on its website USAID and PEPFAR as two of its major international donors. And now we know, of course, yesterday morning that decree by the U.S. President Trump's administration calling for an immediate freezing or halting, of all U.S. foreign aid to countries including South Africa, which has had a cataclysmic effect on a number of programs, particularly in the healthcare sector. Now, we know that South Africa is a major recipient of PEPFAR funds, that of course being the President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, donations and program funding, which we've been receiving since 2004. That's now come to a grinding halt, as well as many other U.S. agency for international development programs, such as the funding to academic institutions like Stellenbosch University for research into a number of important societal issues, particularly in the healthcare sector. Now, I am at the Center for Epidemic Response at Stellenbosch University, SERI, which is not directly affected by that funding cut, but it is run by a man who plays a very crucial role when it comes to research within the healthcare sector in South Africa. My guest today is Dr. Tulio de Oliveira, who is a world-renowned researcher and who is the man who is responsible for leading a team of multidisciplinary researchers and academics during the height of the COVID pandemic in South Africa, in detecting the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, Michelle, we have Dr. de Oliveira here to speak to us about the impact of these funding cuts on academic research, not particularly related to SERI, but to the institution as well as to research and development programs across the country. Professor, thank you for speaking to us. You're a man who's involved in a number of research programs, both at Stellenbosch University and the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We know that now, with its grounding halt to U.S. aid-funded programs, this is going to have a long-term detrimental effect on the research, ongoing research of a number of key health priorities. Could you speak to that?
Okay, thank you, and hello to all your viewers, and thank you for coming to our lab. Yeah. So yes, it will have a big impact in the ecosystem. Yeah, but we also have to remember that the PEPFAR program was especially important to South Africa in the beginning. Yeah, as you mentioned, the program started in 2003, and that was an important time for South Africa. That was the time that we start our antiretroviral therapy program. And what I like to say is that normally we, especially I work with HIV research, we are basically grateful, eternally grateful for the PEPFAR program. It was very crucial to start the program in South Africa. However, the South African government was quite careful also. From the beginning of the big antiretroviral therapy, they decided to procure all the antiretroviral therapy themselves. So we do not depend on external funding to deliver antiretroviral therapies. In addition to that, in the last 3 years, we had big breakthroughs on antiretroviral treatment therapy. We have a new class of drugs, integrase inhibitors, that are extremely efficient. So it's really, really sad and devastating for the NGO session in South Africa to lose the PEPFAR. But at least we are in a good time that we have a well-running program and with very efficient therapy. So at the moment, South Africa will be able to maintain, that's my opinion, the successful program, which is the biggest in the world.
Professor, we do know that the South African government says that only 17% of HIV/AIDS research and funding comes from PEPFAR, but that's still an over 7 billion rand deficit, particularly when it comes to HIV/AIDS research at institutes and NGOs that rely on this funding. What is the plan B? We know that this executive order was signed into decree on the 20th of January, but have organizations, academic institutions been preparing for the moment that we saw yesterday with that grounding halt to funding?
Okay, so it will affect it, especially the non-governmental organizations that help with the delivery of prevention programs, yeah, and that will be mostly affected by that, yeah. However, yeah, the research ecosystem will be much less affected because normally we tend not to depend of PEPFAR or USAID funding and by multiple different foundations, but also by our government. They also invest very heavily on research. So for example, this building that we are here today, it cost around 1.3 billion rand, and 30% was the government that invests. So the government is also trying to invest in their own science program. Yeah. To be honest, what I worry the most is not even about the South Africa, but I even worry about the Americans and the United States of America, because they donate less than 1% of the GDP. And by having very advanced science and innovation in the African continent, you can control epidemics before hit the United States. So I think over time, what we're going to see that maybe some of the people that's going to lose the most of this halt of funding, unfortunately, is going to be the same population that he's trying to protect, the American people. So as you speak, the U.S. had the largest outbreak of the past 50 years of tuberculosis. A lot of the very advanced TB science in the world happened here in South Africa, happened here in this building. So if you do not help to advance that, these pathogens will spread further around the world and through the United States. And then in the end, this lack of donation may cost them much more. For example, a pandemic costs like a million times more than the funding that's being withdrawn at the moment.
And finally, with regard to clinical trials that are now affected, there have been a number of clinical trials in which implants have been inserted into people's bodies for research and development that's been taking place over a number of years. What now that this funding has come to a halt? Okay,
so the funding, what will affect the completions of clinical trials, but it will not affect the safety of the patients. Yeah? Before we start a clinical trial, and South Africa is one of the top clinical trialist countries in the world, we have some of the best organizations and scientists. Yeah, we have also a strong regulation program, so everything that's trial in South Africa is safe for the patients. Yeah? What will happen is that by not completing important clinical trials, yeah, you will start stopping the pipeline of innovative products that need to come to the market. So you may not develop the next vaccine, you may not develop the next efficient diagnostic or therapeutics. And that in the end has a global effect, yeah. So it may affect the whole global, what you saw, biosecurity, yeah? The safety of global populations if we stop identifying quick pathogens and control epidemics where they emerge.
Thank you very much, Professor Tulio de Oliveira, who is the head of the Center of Epidemic Response and Innovation at Stellenbosch University, speaking to the impact that these funding cuts could potentially have on academic institutions that rely on those US aid grants for research purposes. Also speaking to the fact that South Africa is a world leader in terms of clinical trials and offering assurances that the safety of all those patients who are participating in the trials would be a priority. Now, Michelle, I have also been speaking to a number of organizations today that have been affected by these U.S. funding cuts. Many have accused Trump of putting America first and Africa last, and also saying that while the Trump administration is saving $1, it's actually spending lives. So that cataclysmic effect that we're potentially going to be seeing over the next few weeks and months with the decline in funding, the complete funding cuts to a number of institutions, be it research, academic, and also non-governmental, that have been reliant on U.S. aid and funding, U.S. foreign aid funding from the U.S. government for decades on end, are going to have to bear the brunt of those funding shortfalls now. But assurances by the likes of Professor de Oliveira, who is a leading researcher in the country, speaking to the fact that the knock-on effect to countries like America by halting these funding cycles could also be detrimental in terms of helping them to prevent the next wave of an epidemic or pandemic that could be spread. Like I mentioned, this research institute detected the Omicron variant during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's going to be quite alarming, that knock-on effect, if these funding cuts are actually implemented to a point that leading academic and research institutions are not able to do this life-saving, critical research work that has global resonance, Michelle.
Certainly, and it is much more expensive, as Professor de Oliveira says, for a pandemic to break out than the work that they are doing at Stellenbosch University and in many other institutions around the country. Latashia Naidoo, thanks very much indeed for that update.